Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about plasma therapy and what research institutes that have been judging its effectiveness have to say about it. We will also talk about what led to the death of journalist Vikram Joshi in Uttar Pradesh. But first, we talk about India and the United States of America. Over the past month now, India and the US have been increasing their military and intelligence collaboration and cooperation at an unprecedented level. They have been working to step up the information they share at a time when Indian and Chinese troops have been engaged in a tense standoff along the line of actual control in Ladakh for over 11 weeks now. In this segment, Shubhajit Roy, who reports on matters of foreign affairs for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about what these collaborations would mean for India. Shubhajit, you reported that India and US have intensified their intelligence and military collaboration. Could you talk about why that has happened now and what is its significance?
So, as you know, India and US are strategic partners, and that means they cooperate on military, security, political, economic, all these areas. But what we have seen in the last, say, about 11 weeks or so, ever since the border standoff with China came into play, India and the US, they have certain capabilities in terms of intelligence gathering and information sharing, and both have collaborated much closer than in recent history to exchange notes about China's positions, China's capabilities, and Chinese deployments along the LAC. Now, that is crucial because obviously India tracks a lot of these movements through its space organization as well as technical research organizations. But now with the US has much advanced and superior capabilities in these regard, especially when it comes to satellite images and other such technical capabilities. So it always helps as India is able to get access to some of that intelligence, some of that information that has been gathered by US assets through technical means as well as other means.
And could you talk a bit about what kind of intelligence and military information they will be sharing now?
Well, what we do know is that the Chinese deployments along the LSC, especially on their side of the LSC and as well as on the depth areas of the LSC, which is about, say, 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, or 50 kilometers, or even more in the Chinese territory. How much of the Chinese troops have been mobilized? How much of the weapons have been mobilized? What is the kind of deployment? As well as sort of through intercepts, through chatter on the internet, as well as through the technical surveillance through telephone intercepts. All these intelligence is crucial to get a sense of what is the preparation and what is the kind of deployment and what is the kind of capacity of the Chinese military on the Chinese side. And that is crucial information which has, as we understand, in the last few weeks, especially, it has gathered momentum, especially with series of phone calls that took place. If you remember, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he spoke to External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar in third week of June. And thereafter, there have been a series of conversations, as we now know, between National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and the American NSA, Mr. Robert O'Brien, and also between the CDS, General Bipin Rawat, and his counterpart, General Mark Milley, on the US side. So all these conversations have really helped in smoothening this military and security cooperation between the two sides.
And India and America doing collaboration to this extent you mentioned is unprecedented. But how much does it have to do with the Trump administration, and would the status sort of completely change if someone else, say like Joe Biden, were to be elected as the next president after US elections take place this year?
Well, the India-US cooperation has really survived change in administration in the US. If you put, as someone recently pointed out, that if you put Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump in one room, you cannot find more different people than these four people. But if there is one thing all of them would agree on, is the relationship that US should have with India. So India-US relationship has actually been insulated by change in administration, be it Democrats coming to power or Republicans coming to power. So even if there is a change in administration in November elections, one doesn't really foresee a change in the cooperation. There could be changes in emphasis and tone and tenor of different aspects of the relationship. But I think broadly, especially because the worry about China's rise and assertion and aggression is also sort of bipartisan in the US political context right now. So there could be changes in the tone and tenor of how to tackle China. But I think broadly, both India and US, irrespective of administrations, agree that there is a sense of worry, there is a cause of concern about China's aggressive behavior at the global stage, at the regional stage, as well as at the bilateral stage. And having said that, you have to also remember that the Quad mechanism has also sort of evolved, and US, India, Japan, Australia, they've all come together really to take on, in a sense, China and sort of assert their presence in the Indo Pacific region. So the sense one gets is that this partnership is likely to be much more durable than it would have probably happened 10 years ago.
Shubhajit, we have discussed previously, on the podcast, how India is trying to walk a tightrope diplomatically, as in it wants harmony with China and the US, and especially when both of these countries are rivals. Could India sort of risk hurting its relationship with China by being close to the US?
It's not a mutually exclusive situation because, it is actually the two relationships are equally important to India, because you have to realize that both offer different strengths and both have different contours of the relationship. With the US, for example, India has a very deep shared value of democracy, rule of law, of being rule abiding relationship. It has a strong economic as well as strategic and political relationship. With China, the pillars are different. It's a much more economic driven relationship as of now. With the US, there is much more people to people sort of relationship. With China, there is less of that, but it is also sort of growing. With US, India doesn't share a border. With China, India does share a border. So the contours and the context of the relationship is very, very different. So it is not an either or scenario for anyone who looks at this relationship. Both relationships are important. But yes, right now, because of the Chinese aggression at the LAC and around the world and the South China Sea or the Indo-Pacific or in Hong Kong or Taiwan, there's a sense of worry and there's a shared concern about China's behavior. And that is a common cause for India and the US.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about plasma therapy, an experimental treatment method against COVID-19 that has over time gained popularity. The idea is that when your body is exposed to a foreign pathogen, in this case the SARS-CoV-2 virus, your body's response is to produce antibodies. These antibodies help to deactivate the virus and prevent it from invading other cells. These antibodies are contained in plasma, the liquid part of your blood. And once you have recovered or are in the process of recovering, those antibodies stick around in your plasma for a certain amount of time, ready to fight that virus if it comes back. Now, plasma therapy uses that plasma with the antibodies that an infected person has produced and transfers it to patients. In the past, this method has been used in SARS and MERS pandemics. It is important to note that there is no standard treatment for COVID-19 right now, so plasma therapy is one of the many methods that scientists are testing. Currently, the Indian Council of Medical Research, or ICMR, has been conducting a pan-India study on plasma therapy and its efficacy. In this segment, Karishma Mehrotra, who spoke to the institutions participating in ICMR's trials on plasma therapy, joins us to talk about what they have found so far. Karishma, you spoke to a number of institutes that took part in ICMR's plasma therapy trials. What have they found out about whether or not plasma therapy actually works?
Okay, so there are 52 institutions across the country that are participating in ICMR's trial. So the only pan-India trial that exists. And I had spoken to 36 of them that answered my phone call. Of those 36, 24 had said that they saw positive results from the plasma therapy. Now, because 5 of them couldn't even find enough donors or participants to enroll any results into the trial, that means that more than half of those that were participating in the trial said that the plasma therapy was effective. However, pretty consistently, many of these 24 who had cited positive results also said that the therapy needs to be used at a very particular timing. So half of the 24 were explicitly, themselves had mentioned that this therapy should not be used on patients who have already become severe or critical. Many of them recommended within a range of 5 to 10 days of their diagnosis. And it also matters, the timing of the donor's donation also matters, in the sense that if the donor doesn't have antibodies yet, even though they've recovered, that could also be a problem, which is something that people have been noticing, is that it's starting to take roughly a month or so sometimes to even see antibodies show up in a recovered patient. So because the timing of both when the donor needs to donate their plasma and when the patient needs to have the plasma transfused into their blood, these become very, very important parameters that the principal investigators of the participating institutions mentioned to me.
And what kind of benefits did they see people get from plasma therapy?
Pretty consistently across the board, most of the benefits they were mentioning included things like a decrease in the amount of time that the patient had to spend in the hospital. Even some mentioned a decrease in what's called viral load, which is the amount of virus present in the patient, which you can detect in RT-PCR tests. Even the amount of oxygen that the patient required, the amount of time that the patient was able to get off oxygen or decrease oxygen, and also the time in which a negative test result could come. So these were some of the examples that they gave for why they were encouraged by their results.
Were there also institutions that said that plasma therapy doesn't work?
There were. Out of those 36 I spoke to, there were only 3, but still those 3 were pretty blasé about plasma. One in particular had said that she was convinced that this is all sort of a business and corporate cashing in on this therapy. Another said that, plasma's effectiveness is just all conjecture. She thinks that most mild patients recover anyway, which is mild patients were the types of patients that the ICMR trial focused on. One who did say that he had found positive results from the cases and controls that his institution had enrolled, he had still said that, this is something he can't prove, but he feels that the media has given such a hype to plasma. he's noticed that when he tells a patient that they're going to get plasma, they often react so positively. They themselves feel like they will recover quickly. And he said you can see the difference. So pretty much he was describing to me a placebo effect that he thought was partly due to the media. So, that's to say that, of course, plasma has gotten a lot of push from the government and private sector. The Union Health Minister launched a plasma donation campaign and drive. Many of the top government officials and bureaucrats who have gotten COVID have themselves recovered and then donated plasma, or that they took plasma and attribute their recovery to plasma. So it's definitely been in the papers a lot. And I think that my finding, speaking to the principal investigators, was twofold in the sense that it seems to be effective, but it's very dependent on a particular timing.
And Karishma, let's say somebody has COVID and they have mild symptoms and are admitted to the hospital. Like, as things stand, can they access plasma therapy like in any hospital in India right now? Or is it only limited to certain places?
So the guidelines have allowed clinicians to use what's known as off-label use of plasma. Off-label means it's a sort of unofficial approval of plasma. So in a technical guideline sense, yes, any clinician is authorized to use it. But even then, there are parameters that they have to follow. So one of them is that the patient is only mild or moderate. There are a couple other parameters that they must look to, but the health ministry has allowed this as of June 30th to moderate disease patients. Also, the patients must have had tried to use steroids, and their oxygen requirements have to have continued to increase despite their use of steroids. So if they're steroid resistant and they're still in a moderate phase, they are approved to use plasma therapy.
And I mean, Delhi government is, one government that has been pushing for plasma therapy for a while. In Delhi, we've seen 2 plasma banks that the Delhi government inaugurated. And one of the things that the chief minister was saying, that there was a lot of chaos before these banks opened up. People, once they heard about plasma therapy, they would call people and find out who has recovered. And, they were just trying to get hands on plasma however they could. So, considering these trials are going on and we are hearing positive things about it from most of these clinicians and, scientists, going forward, how big of a challenge will it be for people to access plasma?
Well, I think one thing is to note, and this is something that the principal investigators had also told me, is that because we keep hearing about plasma in the news for severe patients, it's created a lot of distress for people in a rushed manner looking for plasma as if it's the end-all cure. And so that's one thing that I think we'll see in the coming weeks, is a further emphasis that this is not a cure for severe patients. One principal investigator said, he doesn't think this will be the gold standard in therapy and treatment, but it can be a bridge to stabilize patients. But to your second point about, the coming challenges, one is the plasma has to be fresh. So that's something the principal investigators had noticed as well, is that it matters how long ago you took out the plasma from the donor. 2, like I said, finding enough donors seems to be an issue, especially considering that many institutions could not find enough donors to participate in the trial. So there could be, and this is something that across the world people might struggle with, is not having enough donors. But it still remains to be seen. I mean, I spoke to quite a few of the principal investigators, but it's important that we wait until the pan-India data comes out and we have some concrete numbers to look at so that we can make any further claims about how this should be used in the future, what strategy we should take. But considering my conversations with the individuals and not in an aggregated sense, it seems like the results will lean quite heavily towards ineffectiveness, but under certain considerations.
And in the end, we talk about the killing of a journalist in Uttar Pradesh's city of Ghaziabad. Earlier this week on Monday, a journalist named Vikram Joshi was shot dead in front of his 2 minor daughters. His killing came a day after he had filed a complaint with the UP police about one of his relatives allegedly being molested. In this segment, Amil Bhatnagar, who reports on Uttar Pradesh for the newspaper, joins us to talk about this case, how it is connected with the complaint he tried to file, and an incident that goes back more than a year.
Vikram Joshi and his sister stay in the same vicinity. Their houses must be a kilometer or two apart. In March 2019, Vikram's sister had alleged that a group of people in the same area had sort of tried to create a ruckus during time of Holi, and there were some problems, and a case was filed then, and a couple of them had been arrested under preventive detention and were later released on bail. A year went by, nothing happened as such. And a few days ago, Vikram's sister alleged that the same men who had last year come and tried to create a problem came to their house, hurled abuses, and passed lewd comments at Vikram's niece.
Now, knowing that these problems had happened at his sister's place who lived nearby, Vikram decided to approach the police.
A complete letter was written to the local Thana, which was Vijayanagar police station, and a letter was also written to the SSP's office, which said that this 20-year-old woman was being harassed by this group of people, and when her brother objected to the harassment, he was assaulted and beaten up. In the complaint, the accused were Ravi, Chotu, and two unknowns. These were the same people who were also mentioned in the complaint back in March 2019. So now there was a pattern that, the people who had bothered them earlier had now surfaced and were trying to create problems again.
These people lived in the same colony as Vikram. According to the police profile, they were unemployed, and one of them, Chotu, was also in 2016 accused in a stabbing case and was granted bail. Now, although Vikram had tried to file a molestation complaint, according to Amil's conversation with the family, they were not given a receipt of the complaint letter.
So between 16th to 21st, the family alleged that the sub-inspector of the particular station was in cahoots with these accused. So they perhaps once went to the colony to even find out whether these accused are in the area or not, which is like a normal procedure. Like when an FIR is filed, police teams visit the spot. If you have mentioned the address of an accused, they visit those houses and check whether a person is there or not to make arrests, to apprehend them, bring them in for questioning.
They alleged that no due procedure was followed, and in those 5 days, the family kept waiting for the police to take some action. Vikram's sister was of the opinion that the accused were planning something. They were also allegedly angered by the complaint that Vikram had filed and how he was trying to get things done as a journalist.
So on Monday night at around 10 p.m., Vikram is leaving his niece's house. It was a birthday party. He is on a two-wheeler with his two daughters. He is going back home to Pratap Vihar. On the way, a group of men corner him. His scooty disbalances and he falls. Those two children, terrified, scared, run away. One of them runs to the sister's house, shouting that someone has killed my father. The other girl stands a little away, hoping that those men will go away eventually. Those men beat him up, they assault him, and one of them shoots him in the head. It was a matter of merely less than a minute, and they abscond after that. The 8-year-old daughter who had stayed at the spot tries to ensure whether her father is alive or not, asks for help. The younger daughter, the 5-year-old daughter, was also there on the scooty. Meanwhile, had gone back to people to alert them of this incident, and she also called help.
Vikram was later taken to a hospital but passed away within 24 hours. And information that came out later was that 2 hours prior to his death, Vikram had actually called and told the police that he had spotted the accused and that he felt that something was wrong. But the sub-inspector allegedly told him that he was unwell and won't be able to come. Now, the initial complaint, the previous animosity, and the lack of police action seem to have led to Vikram's death. After the entire incident, action has been taken against the officers involved.
A sub-inspector, Raghavendra, who was the jockey in charge in Vijayanagar police station, he was suspended with immediate effect. In my conversation with the police, they told me that they're looking at the role of the SHO as well, and perhaps other policemen who were they had the accused in confidence, perhaps, or they were not willing to take action against with regards to the complaint. So now the police is basically looking at an internal investigation as to who were the people who let the things get out of control. So now there's going to be a fact-finding report internally, and within that report, accountability will be fixed and to pinpoint which police officer was it exactly and what was his role and what was his connection with the accused that let this gruesome, brutal murder take place in like broad public view.
The problem of police not registering complaints has been highlighted time after time. And this is a general trend, Amal says, that has occurred for some time now.
Even in deeper analysis, and we look at these police stations at the local level, the problem is at the local level, the immediate thana and the sub-inspectors and chowki in charge. In fact, in Ghaziabad itself, there have been several policemen in the last 1.5 years have been suspended for letting gambling take place, for not filing a complaint when it comes to robbery. In fact, there was a woman that had alleged that a case of harassment was being turned against her and she was being threatened with legal action when she had gone to file a proper complaint. Now, what happens is that when your immediate police station, your point of FIR, your first complaint, is not carry out the paperwork or is not willing to carry out investigation, no amount of research or investigation later on can bring that case to its proper justice or proper end.
In the past too, inspectors have been suspended and inquiries have been called. But yet instances of people not being heard at the police station continue to occur. Amil says that because of this, people are disincentivized to reach out to the police. This includes women who are asked uncomfortable questions when they try to file complaints about sexual harassment.
So, police reforms at the local level are of utmost importance, which has also been asked for by retired bureaucrats, retired IPS officers, retired DGPs, even several present senior police officers as well. So, perhaps just sensitization training and even a better sense of, say a punishment, if a policeman is found, would also perhaps change things for the better for local people.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.